Hey everyone, welcome back to Papa's Workshop. Today's video is about using epoxy to be able to cover a table. Now the epoxy that I'm going to be using is the Craftor epoxy. Now this is a 1-to-1 ratio to be able to mix this. Now this product comes with both part A and part B. Each are 1-gallon containers. You also get some rubber gloves. You get the pumps that you can put into these 2-gallon containers, and I'm going to choose not to use those today. But you also get this 500 millimeter cup, along with some other cups that you can use to be able to mix, and it has the graduated scale that's on there, along with some popsicle sticks and these various spreaders that you can use to be able to mix the epoxy and spread the epoxy. And of course, you're going to get the instruction sheet that comes with the Craftor epoxy. Now, preparation of your tabletop is actually very important. Now, I went ahead and sanded this wood to begin with, and I put on this paint right here. Now, this is a Glidden. It's just a universal color sample. It was made in the satin. That was the only thing that was available. They did not have anything else. I just mixed it to the color that I wanted to and put it onto this. Now I put on 2 coats of this paint, sanding in between, and now I just finished sanding the surface of this again, and that will create a mechanical bond for the epoxy to be able to hold on to with this paint. Now preparation is very, very important when you're working with the epoxy. The first thing you want to be able to do is keep in mind the safety considerations. You definitely want to use gloves, and if you have the respirator, by all means use the respirator. You also want to work in a clean, dust-free environment. Now that also means if you have the air conditioner on, probably be a good idea to turn off the air conditioner. Now also in preparation for this, I took a sheet of plastic and put it over my workbench. That way if epoxy spills on it, no big deal. It's going to go onto the plastic and not onto the workbench itself. Now it's also critical that this is dust-free. Now I'm going to take a microcloth and I'm going to wipe this down and to get it completely clean. Now the plastic's very important to be able to have down because that is going to protect this workbench from the epoxy that will drip off of this tabletop. Now I've already sanded this and I'm taking a clean brand new microcloth and I'm going to wipe this down. Very important to be able to have this dust free. And I also want to be able to get the edges real good as well. So completely wiped down now. So that part is done. Now, oftentimes, the countertops are made out of the MDF, but rarely out of the plywood. Now, I'm using the plywood for this one, so with the primer down, that is going to work out real well. It's very important to use the primer. Depending on the color of the epoxy that you're using, the primer can also vary. Oftentimes, for the lighter epoxy that I mix, I'll use a white type of a primer to be able to put onto the material, or I would use a dark color. For an example, if I was using the black, then I would actually prime the wood or the MDF with the black material. When I poured this top, I used the black paint as a primer. Now that we have the surface completely clean, I want to be able to make sure that it is level. It needs to be level in both directions, and I want to be able to have this stand off of the table. In addition to that, I want to be able to protect the back side. Now when you pour epoxy, you're going to get drips around the edge. And I'm going to put tape down to be able to make it a little bit easier to be able to deal with the drips that come off of the epoxy. In addition to that, I'm going to put a strip of tape all the way around this tabletop to create a form, if you will, or a dam to be able to hold the epoxy. And after the epoxy begins to set up, I'll remove the tape to be able to let the epoxy flow over the edge. Now I'm going to be using this blue tape to put all the way around the edges of this. And I have to be careful with this piece of molding because I know that that epoxy will drip over to this edge and there'll be a row of bubbles there. Now this does not have to be done all in one piece of tape. So I'm just going to start right here and I'm just going to go to this edge. Off camera, I'm going to continue to put this blue tape around this edge. I'll be back in just a moment to show you what it looks like when it's all finished. If you cut the tape a little short, no big deal. We'll just add another piece of tape right on top to be able to cover up that area. There we go. Now next I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to put tape all around this edge. And for that I'm going to use the 3/4 inch tape. And this tape will come off as I go through the epoxy process. But this will keep the epoxy on while it begins to set up. And I'll push that down good. Little strip into here. So why do I do this? Well, epoxy is self-leveling. As you pour out the epoxy onto the surface, it wants to spread out. Now you're going to help it and spread it out also, but it will drip over the edge. Prematurely, you're going to waste the epoxy. By putting this tape on the edge, it holds it in place. And the last piece. Now I want to make sure that sticks good on the side, but as the epoxy begins to set up, you'll notice that this tape will start to come off, and that's okay. But I still have my wall here, and that's going to keep all the epoxy in the working area itself until I'm ready for it to roll over the side. Now I also have the hole right here. I'm just going to take a piece of the tape. I'm going to use the aid of a pencil to be able to get it in there. And that should work just fine. If a little bit of epoxy gets into the hole, perfectly fine, because I'm just going to take a 3/8 inch drill and drill that hole back out. So not a big deal. So this prep work is done. Next step, we want to make sure that this area is completely level in both the X and the Y direction. Now I'm going to use these little standoffs to be able to put underneath this to be able to get it level. And really 4 of them should be all that I need. And then we'll make the adjustments from there to be able to get it perfectly level. So let's get it level and just see how close we are. So that's perfectly level. And over here, that's perfectly level. Okay, now that we've got the surface completely level, we need to start looking at the color. Now I'm using the alcohol ink today by Let's Resin. Now this alcohol ink is going to provide a little bit of color to the epoxy, but you'll still see the brown underneath. Not sure how good this is going to come out in the camera, but we've got a reddish brown, brown, coffee, and a black walnut, and the different colors. I think the color we're going to go with on this alcohol ink by Let's Resin is the brown. So this is going to be 14 inches by 23 inches. Time for a little math. 14 inches times 23 inches equals a total of 322 inches. If we take that and divide it by 144, because 144 equals 1 square foot, 12 by 12. So you divide the 322 divided by the 144, that gives you 2.24 square feet. And if you take that and multiply it by 3, because you need 3 ounces per square foot, you're going to need to mix up 6.7 ounces. So we'll just round that up to 7 ounces. So we're going to need to mix 7 ounces total for this project. So that's 3.5 ounces of part A and 3.5 ounces of part B. I wanted to get an idea of what this brown is going to look like. So this is just part A right now with a few drops of the brown, with the brown alcohol ink Violet's resin. And I think that's going to be a good color. So I've got just over 3.5 ounces. I'm going to go ahead and pour part B now in, where it will be about 7 3/4 of an ounce. So there's 7 ounces, and that's going to be good. Now at this point, I'll need to stir this for a good 3 minutes. Now one of the things I want to point out, typically when you're coloring the epoxy, you're going to use the micro powders to be able to do that. A little bit goes a long way. But with the alcohol ink, it makes it more of a translucent type color, and that's what I want for this application, because I still want to be able to see the brown coming through this epoxy itself. So you want to make sure you scrape the sides really good, and you also want to scrape the bottom real good as you're mixing this for the 3 minutes. And I'm going to add just a little bit more of the alcohol ink in it now. Now I have one glove on and one without the glove. The reason I have no glove on that hand is so that I can still work with the camera. And you gotta scrape the sides good, because you see how that alcohol ink wants to sit on the surface. And you gotta mix it good and get it down into the resin itself. And you can see how that's a real rich color. I like that color. I think that's going to go good with this, and it's going to change colors a little bit because of the paint color that's on the wood itself. If you can see now by scraping the sides real good, that little bit of alcohol ink that was on the surface is now mixed down into the rest of the resin. Okay, I've been mixing now for 3 minutes, and it's time now to let this sit for 5 minutes. It's kind of like watching grass grow. Now, I'm not sure you can see this in the camera, but a lot of these little bubbles are actually coming to the surface and popping. Now, it's not going to get rid of all the bubbles, but that will get rid of some of them. And they're a little bit smaller than they were originally after mixing this. Okay, it's been 5 minutes now, and it's time to start pouring this out. Now, I'm going to pour real slow, and that's actually going to help get rid of a lot of the bubbles also. Now, because we're not making a marbling type look, or we're not trying to do a granite look, we just have one color. We can just pour this out throughout the whole thing. And if you look close, a lot of the bubbles have dissipated just by pouring a nice slow stream like this. And it really enhances the color below. Now I'll set that right there and let all that drain out, and I'll start spreading this around. Now this is self-leveling, but at this point all I want to be able to do is just get this to cover all of the area, because you're going to see little gaps like this, and you can see how it's filling in on its own. If it doesn't, then it's called the surface tension that's preventing it from being able to do that, and you can help it out by moving it around. And I want to bring this right up to the edge. Now I'm going to scrape this out, and you have to be careful when you scrape it out, because if you haven't mixed this real good, you can actually create soft spots in your resin because it wasn't mixed thoroughly enough. But what I'm going to do is take this and basically spread it out right here and mix it again right here on the surface, and that way that will ensure that I have a good, complete, thorough mix. And that takes care of that little hole. And like I said, I'm going to bring this out to the edge, but not all the way to the edge yet. Now as this self levels, it's going to start working its way to the edge also. You see how this is already on its own reached the edge. And at this point, you have some little tiny bubbles, but very little bubbles in this resin. Another thing that you can do is just take your hand and rub this and spread it out if you don't want to use the spatula. And that will work too. This plywood looks like it's got a little tiny dip in the middle. All right, now that is looking real good. I'm gonna let this self-level. I'm gonna get the torch and we'll pop any few little bubbles that are remaining. Just go over this very lightly and that will pop the bubbles. And there were very, very few bubbles that needed to be popped. Now we'll let this sit for about 15-20 minutes and we'll be ready to remove the tape. And that way it'll let the epoxy flow over the side and have the minimum amount of dripping onto this tabletop. If you get up really, really close, you can just see the texture of the wood underneath the resin. But pull back just a little bit and it just looks like a beautiful honey color, and that's what I was hoping for. And the last thing I'm going to do is just pull this out and we'll let that epoxy flow down into there also. With the tape removed, you can see how the epoxy is beginning to roll over the edge and drip onto the tabletop. And that's perfectly normal. Now sometimes you're going to have a little bit of surface tension on the edge, and you can just take your finger and rub that a little bit, break the surface tension. But quite frankly, this is looking absolutely amazing. You can also see that there's very few drips that are actually on the workbench itself. And that's because the epoxy was already beginning to set up when I removed the tape, and that allowed it to be able to have the minimum amount of waste. And as you can see, as I look at this, I am very, very pleased with how this looks. I think this is the exact color that I was looking for. It almost looks like a nice rich honey or a butterscotch color, and that's what I wanted to be able to have for this countertop. Now it takes about 24 hours for this to be able to cure, and fully cure 72 hours. After about 45 minutes, I removed the tape from underneath and removed those drips. And the end result is absolutely phenomenal. I love having this end table in between the two chairs. It does get a lot of use. And I love the fact that it has this concealed compartment in the center, and that works great as well. So all in all, very pleased. I can put my drinks on this tabletop and not worry about damaging the top at all with this epoxy. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to use the Craftor epoxy. And quite frankly, I was very, very impressed with it. The most important thing that I really like about it is, yes, it is truly crystal clear. And number two is that it is bubble free. Now, I used the torch to be able to remove those last few tiny little bubbles, but quite frankly, I could probably have just eliminated that altogether, and it would have been fine. On almost every resin that you use out there, you need to use the torch, or you need to use a heat gun, or just a little small flame to eliminate the bubbles. This one, virtually, you didn't have to do that. I used a torch just to make sure, but as I was visually inspecting it, there was really no bubbles there other than maybe one or two, and they would probably pop. So what did I not like? Well, the one thing that I have to be able to point out to you is typically I use 3 ounces per square foot to be able to do my estimates on how much epoxy that I need for a tabletop. Well, I could have actually used a little bit more with this epoxy. I think 4 ounces per square foot would have worked a whole lot better. It would have given me a little bit more epoxy to work with to be able to get to those edges. But still in all, when I removed the tape, the self-leveling aspect did work. It allowed that epoxy to be able to flow over the edge of that top, and it worked out extremely well. Now that's a very minor flaw as far as what I'm used to versus this epoxy. So in the future videos, yeah, I'm going to use 4 ounces per square foot when I'm using the Bond Craftor, and that's going to solve that problem. Now, we'll be doing quite a few additional videos, not only with this crafting resin, using the different molds and make all kinds of different projects. Now, I also have some other projects planned where we'll be doing a deep pour epoxy with the Bond Craftor, and we'll see how that works. But so far, I'm extremely impressed with the Bond Craftor epoxy. Now, in the description below, I will put in links where you can go to their website and check out their products and see the different selections that they have. Now, if you liked the video today, by all means, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget, hit that little subscribe button down below. Now, also, check out this video right up here for more epoxy projects. I've got kitchen countertops that I've done. I've got bathroom tops that I've done. A lot of different projects working with the micro powders and with the alcohol inks. So check out these videos over here to be able to learn more about the epoxy process. And if you have some questions, please leave me a comment down below. Ask the question. I'll do my very best to be able to answer any questions that you have. All you have to do is leave me a comment below, and I'll do my very best to answer any questions that you have with the epoxy. So for now, everyone, I'm going to look forward to seeing you in the next video. So bye-bye. See you real soon.